Hey everyone, this is Jay and welcome to my channel. The first book that I read in February was Eversion by Alistair Reynolds. This book was a sci-fi mystery about a man who relives a doomed exploration expedition over and over again from a different time period each time. This is definitely one of those books that was written because of the concept, and it was a really cool concept. I'm not trying to give it flack for that. This book really is all about the journey. It gives very, very hard Heart of Darkness vibes to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if the author said this was a rewrite of Heart of Darkness in a sci-fi setting. One thing to note is this book isn't terribly diverse. I think there's a single female character, and she is not written well. She's written quite badly. The strongest point of this book, I think, was the friendship between the main character and I think he has a couple different roles throughout the book, but he's the gunnery character. Their friendship was very fun to read, and I thought the most engaging part of the book. The ending was interesting from a character standpoint, but plot-wise, it was a little convoluted. Definitely just kind of there to serve the purpose of the concept, which is why I think this book is a concept book rather than having something fully flushed. All right, I should probably go let the cat out now. Anyway, I gave this book a high 3 stars. I haven't seen anything conceptually like it, and I did enjoy it. The second book I read this month was Migrations by Charlotte McConaghy. This is a speculative literary fiction book about a woman who goes on a globe-spanning boat trip to find the last of the Arctic terns while outrunning something in her past. Damn it, now I gotta go let the cat back in. This book read kind of like a slice of life and yet was simultaneously extremely engrossing. The writing was very beautiful and extremely purposeful. Many of the lines contained multiple meanings and interpretations, figurative and literal, within the story. The entire book just radiated a sense of cold and sadness throughout the entire story, which made a lot of sense narratively. The whole story was full of metaphor and symbolism, just so beautifully done. The narrative arc of the main character also so intricately reflected the theme of environmental decay within the book. It was a very poignant study of humanity and everything that we are losing in the environmental crisis that we're facing right now. But at the same time, it raised a very interesting duality of both the plight of the environmentalists, but also the people whose livelihood depends on a lot of these activities that are threatening the environment, and kind of tried to pay heed to both sides of the coin. That being said, I do think the book was very strongly in favor of environmental reform to try to protect and kind of grow back as much of the environment as we can. However, I do think it's important to take into account the people that are impacted by these changes as well. The way it's written is so lyrical and almost reminiscent of mythology in its telling. So you know where the story is going, but the getting there is just such an achingly beautiful and sad trip that you enjoy every moment leading up to it, to the point where some of the plot points don't make a ton of sense from a logical perspective, but make sense within the story from a mythological or fable retelling point of view. It deals with themes of grief and loss, both on a personal scale and a grander global scale, as well as belonging, identity, and staying true to one's nature. Overall, I thought this book was phenomenal. I really enjoyed it, and it was another 5-star for me. The next book I finished this month was Love Theoretically by Hazelwood. If you're on Book Talk at this point, you probably know what this book is about, but just in case, this is a contemporary romance novel about a woman who kind of does fake dating on the side to supplement her career because she's still very early in her career and she's not making a lot of money. So she applies for a tenured teaching position in physics at a university. However, turns out one of the members of the interviewing board is one of her fake boyfriend's brother, and he only knows her fake persona. So shenanigans ensue, and they fall in love because it's a romance novel. After reading this, I really understand why so many people like it. It's very engaging, it's very easy to read, it's very fun, brainless, it's a good time. And I think one of the appeals here actually is that it is very predictable. You can see where the story is going, but instead of kind of getting bored by it, it's really easy to anticipate what's coming next. The narrative style is very fun and engaging without being too quirky. It balances that line between annoying and engaging very, very well. And the science references, as far as I can tell from a layman's point of view, because I am not a physicist, they're very understandable without being alienating. The reader understands enough that it makes them feel smart without necessarily fully understanding all the nuance of whatever's being discussed. The only caveat to that, however, is that the main character definitely comes across as very, very smart in her field. However, dear Lord, is she dense in regards to any relationship that she has. Just, my God, her skull must be thick as a rock. I'm pretty sure there's one point in the story where the hero flat out says that he can't stop thinking about her and she's always on his mind, and she's like, but he doesn't like me, right? Like, come on, lady. It's not that hard to figure out. And while that was very funny for the majority of the story, eventually it did get kind of old. Like, lady, just listen to what he's putting down. He's laying it out pretty clear. I don't know how much more you need before you realize. Another fairly small caveat I have is there's this one part, it's very minor, where they're at a party and they're discussing with some of Hazelwood's previous characters about when they lived in California. And one of them lived in Palo Alto and the other one lived in Pasadena. And the only Palo Alto I know is up in the SF Bay area, and Pasadena is down in LA. And these two are supposed to have hung out regularly. Like, did they fly to each other regularly? Did they have private jet? How are they hanging out so regularly from that far away? Like, these places are not close. They're like a 14-hour drive. So that part kind of took me out of the story because I was like, what? But again, fairly minor. I couldn't let it go. The last thing that I was really, really excited about was that there is a character who is implied to be ace and arrow, or asexual and aromantic, and I got really excited about that. I really don't see that representation much in books, and I kind of liked him more as a side character because, I could shoehorn my own experiences better into it since I am also asexual, though not aromantic, so that was great. I really enjoyed that. So honestly, big hype up in my esteem just from that. I ended up giving this one a high 3 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought it did what it wanted to do very well, and it was just a really fun time. After that, I finished Godkiller by Hannah Kaner, the first book in the Fallen God series. This is an epic fantasy quest story with multiple point of views between a god killer, a knight, and a child that's bound to a god in a world where gods are corporeal and outlawed by the king. This book took a really long time before it really grabbed my attention. I think I wasn't fully engaged in it until around 70% in. In fact, I almost DNF'd it, but I am in the end glad that I didn't because the last bit was very exciting to read and it held my interest very well, but getting to that point was a real slog. The main interesting premise in it was the world building, and that's why I ended up not DNFing, because the world was such an interesting concept. You can tell that the author did put a lot of consideration into how culturally the motivations of people would change based on this concept of corporeal gods that live and act among everyday people. I honestly thought that they were most engaging or most reflected in the side characters. Interestingly enough, the main characters, while interesting, I feel like didn't hold as much of my attention as the side characters, which is a bit of a shame. Interestingly enough, though, I feel like this book was actually a bit short for everything that it was trying to do. I wanted it to spend more time building up the world and making the main characters compelling while simultaneously feeling like the beginning was too long. So I don't really know what I wanted out of this book. Maybe I should just shut my trap. I think it would have been more interesting if the book had spent more time on a larger scale, like talked more about all the different political factions and how they were engaging with each other. We got such small snippets because we were so focused on these 3 point of views that were so close together that we really did not get very much of a view of the entire world. And the view that we did see outside of the basic concept and tenets of the world was a very basic fantasy setting. I ended up giving this book a high 3 because it just waffled so much between the beginning and the end, but overall I think it was a positive experience. That being said, based on where the book left off, it does sound like the second book is going to get much more into these political machinations, which I am much more interested in. So I am still excited for the second book, and I think it's going to be coming out next month, so I'm going to keep my eye out for that one. After that, I wrapped up The City of Dreaming books by Walter Moers and translated by John Brownjohn. This is a German children's fantasy about a young dinosaur who goes to the City of Books to track down the greatest author that has ever lived and all the shenanigans he runs into during that search. This book was really quaint. It was very fun, very much a children's story in the best way, and it's written very humorously. It is very much a classic children's story in that the story is kind of divided into different little adventures the main character undergoes, one after another until the conclusion of the book. There's definitely a through story that kind of links them all together, but each one is fairly independent of the others outside of that. One thing I also really like that it does is that though it's aimed at children, it never talks down to its audience. It treats them with respect in a context that young children can understand. The humor style is very, very tongue-in-cheek, encouraging the reader to laugh along with it. It's simultaneously a parody, satirizing the publishing industry, while simultaneously being a loving homage to books and literature. The world is also very, very fascinating. I've never read a world quite like this one, so I thought it was very fun to explore it. However, the writing is extremely meandering, so if you're not a fan of a lot of asides and little bits that have no forebear on the story whatsoever, then maybe this book isn't for you. I also thought this ending was somewhat abrupt and a little jarring given the verbosity of the rest of the book. I ended up giving this book a high 3. I did really enjoy it, and I thought it was a fun time. I then finished off Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. Full disclosure, the main reason that I picked this one up was actually because of the Fairy Loot edition that was announced. I did always want to read this book, but that edition was so pretty that I sped it up or moved it up my TBR so that I was sure to read it before potentially getting it. And I am very glad that I read it. It was an extremely cute book. At this point, I'm pretty sure that everyone already knows what this book is about, if only from the Ghibli movie, Howl's Moving Castle. But for some reason, in case you're living under a rock, this book is about Sophie, who gets cursed by the Witch of the Waste to turn into an old woman. She then joins Howl's household in an effort to rectify the spell and turn her young again. Chaos then ensues. I do think that while there were a lot of plot events happening, this book was definitely more focused on the characters, which was a delight because the characters are really fun to read about, especially old Sophie. She is fantastic and I love her to pieces. Another thing that was kind of interesting was I had seen the movie well before I ever even knew it was based on a book. So it was really cool to see all of the points of intersection between the movie plot and the book, because though the movie is based on the book, I would argue that they feel very disparate, like two completely different pieces of media. So the little nods and tidbits from the movie that were actually in the book were very interesting to see because they felt almost out of context compared to watching the movie. There is a romance in here that I wasn't expecting because I don't recall seeing anything like it in the movie. And it was a little bit weird, a little off-putting, but honestly, I thought it was very forgivable because the way the story is told is so fairy tale-like, and many fairy tales just have bonkers romances, so I was able to overlook it in this one. I also thought that Jones did a really good job of tying together all of the different plot threads that she'd entered into the story. There's a lot of little details that are easy to overlook throughout the book that tie beautifully together at the end, and I thought that was really cool. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It was just so adorable, such a pleasant read, and I really enjoyed the entire time I spent reading this book. The next book that I finished this month was The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw. This book was absolutely grotesque. The entire book is really weird, and intentionally so. It's supposed to be weird, but it's very uncomfortable for the reader, both in prose, setting, event, style. Everything is very unsettling, which I think the book intended to do and did very well. A lot of the plot points in the book don't necessarily feel like they make a lot of sense within the story. However, like many short form literature, I feel like this story goes really hard on the symbolism and deals with very heavy themes like power, exploitation, extreme societal abuse, sexism, otherness, and probably a lot more that I didn't pick up while I was reading. It's to the point that I think the majority of events that happen in the story are actually representative of larger statements regarding the themes, as opposed to purely for plot progression within the book. And honestly, I don't really have too much of an issue with that, especially in short form storytelling, because I actually think it can strengthen a book when it pulls that off really well. The only part that felt truly out of place within the story was the romance, which I personally did not see the point of. I thought it came out of left field a little bit. I think it was meant to be poetic and symbolic of something, but I couldn't pick up what it was, so it just felt a little jarring and random. Now, that being said, my main gripe was actually the gore. There was a lot of gore. Arguably too much gore, but I also don't like gore, so take a grain of salt with that one. The gore did make me really uncomfortable though, and it did severely impact my ability to enjoy the book. There were multiple times where I was kind of squinting at the page, just trying to get through as quickly as possible because the gore made me so uncomfortable. Gore is just not my thing, and it ended up bringing this one down to about a low 3 for me. Overall, I thought it was a very mid book. After that was The Last Word by Taylor Adams. This is definitely a controversial opinion, but I thought this book was really boring and DNF'd it at 31%. It's about a woman who leaves a bad review on a book that she read on Amazon, and the author comes to kill her in retaliation. The premise of this one was just too absurd for me, and there were a lot of assumptions being made in the story that I would consider to be quite large logical leaps that somehow proved conveniently true later on. Like, things are happening to this woman, and she's just concluding, yes, this must be the reason. And as a reader, you're like, what? How did you get there? Like, what was the logical sequence that led you to that conclusion? But don't worry, somehow she's right. I mean, the book really doesn't seem like it's trying to be that complex, so maybe I'm just giving it more credit than it's due. This disconnect, though, made it really hard for me to connect to the main character because so many of her actions just didn't make any sense. I'm just not a huge fan of the woe is me, super broken protagonists that are so prevalent in thrillers right now. I did end up continuing to slog through it just because it's a thriller, I want to get to the thrilling part to see if it gets better. But unfortunately, I did get to that point and I didn't care. I felt nothing. Especially when they're making choices that I just cannot understand why, even from a character point of view. The only time I did actually feel scared or any kind of emotion really was when the dog was threatened. And you know what? If that's the only fear I'm going to feel is for an animal, if an animal gets injured, then fuck no, it's not for me. It's not for me. I then decided to switch it up a bit, pick up a romance, and I read Making Faces by Amy Harmon. This is a contemporary romance for people who are true Americans. It's about a veteran with PTSD who comes back from Afghanistan being saved by the love of a girl who has loved him for as long as she can remember. But seriously, it reads like a stereotype of America, small town America. He talks about 9/11 within the first 10%. This book was written in 2013, so, 12 years after the fact. It's definitely pro-military and talks about Jesus incessantly. Like, if you have any kind of Christianity-related religious trauma, don't pick it up. It's not for you. The strength of the book, though, is in its characters. They all felt very real, including the side characters, to the point where I actually liked a lot of the side characters more than the main characters, and in a way, their character arcs felt much more interesting than the main two. In fact, objectively best character is one of the side characters, Bailey. And because the side characters felt so real, the romance also felt very natural and organic, and it really made me feel giddy as the romance progressed and they reached different stages of accepting one another. Needless to say, given the amount of Jesus in this book, it's a chaste romance, but it didn't feel lacking or shallow because of it. The author did a good job of not making it feel like a purity book, even though there wasn't any hanky-panky in it. Unfortunately, this book does commit the cardinal sin of romance of going off the rails at the very end. The entire book is fairly tame and rooted in reality, and then all of a sudden, at the very end, it's just drama. Drama, drama, drama. Which, I mean, yes, fair. This kind of thing does happen in real life, but it was a bit jarring going from very run-of-the-mill, kind of everyday events to that. Just lots and lots of trauma being dumped all over the characters for no actual plot reason other than drama. Very boring. To the point where it did drop a star for me and solidified it as a 4-star read. Especially because it seems to imply that the characters reach some kind of romantic realization, but the truth of the matter is that they were already pretty much there. So completely unnecessary to the story other than bonus trauma. Boring. Then for my nonfiction book of the month, I decided to pick up What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu, which was also due at the library, so I just dropped everything to read it very quickly. This book was so good. 5 stars. 5 million stars. It's a memoir about a woman coming to terms and learning to cope with the complex PTSD diagnosis stemming from childhood abuse. Stephanie Fu is a podcast producer, and you can tell that she writes for a living. She's so genuine, witty, intelligent, and her authenticity just bleeds off the page. As you might be able to guess, a lot of the topics she talks about are very heavy and very dark, but she does an excellent job of balancing the horrificness of everything that she went through with moments of levity and humor so that you never feel bogged down by what you're reading. Though she is talking about her personal experiences, she does go deeper than that and also analyzes what may have caused her parents to become people who would abuse their child, while simultaneously never using these discoveries as an excuse or justification for their choices and actions. And even further than that, she analyzes the cultural and historical traumas of immigrant groups as well, and the complicity of Western powers in that trauma. More specifically, as an Asian American, she talks about a lot of the traumas that affect that particular demographic, like the weight of the model minority label, cultural expectations and taboos, familial piety, and intergenerational trauma. I am actually half ethnically Chinese Malay, while Fu is full ethnically Chinese Malay, and I resonated with her accounts so strongly, though on a much lighter scale. I saw a lot of my own experiences through hers. I cannot stress enough, much lighter scale. So many of her realizations and findings were affirming for me, and I really felt seen. Even if some of the conclusions were things I had already known, it felt so good for someone to acknowledge them. I also really appreciated that she discussed so many healing and coping strategies, even if they didn't necessarily work for her, acknowledging that different people will have different success with various strategies. I really learned so much from this book. I learned why I behave in certain ways in certain situations. It really affirmed some of my self-regulation techniques are rooted in practice, even if I didn't learn them from any professional, and areas of my behavior to be conscious of moving forward that I might not have realized were stemming from these kinds of experiences. Honestly, by the end of this book, I was so invested in her journey and incredibly proud of her and everything that she had been through, everything she'd written about, and all of her success in getting to the point that she is now. I really could not recommend this book enough. Go pick it up if you haven't read it yet. I then picked up The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. This one took me forever to finish. It's also one of the densest books I've ever read, and I mean that physically. It's over 600 pages, but condensed into the size of a 400-page book. People that I would hand it to would literally drop it because they weren't expecting it to be so heavy. Honestly, part of the reason it took me so long to read it is probably because I could only hold it for so long before my arms got sore. The book itself is a speculative literature novel with sci-fi elements, which follows a psychic girl's life through accounts of people tangential to her as events lead her to a final battle against an all-consuming evil. This book is told in a series of character narratives, and since each account skips in time, they are only very loosely tied together. And though the premise is very engaging at first, it loses novelty fairly quickly. This is especially prevalent in the middle portions, where we're suddenly introduced to a brand new character and asked to learn and care about them 300 pages into the book, when we're still hundreds of pages from any actual real climax happening. Because of that, some accounts just felt like they didn't really matter to the story, and were actually just ways for the author to comment on some political or social topic that he may have felt strongly about, and maybe didn't have another outlet to give way to it or something. I don't know. That being said, the character studies were actually the strong points. They're all very unique and have their own voices. They all change throughout their narratives. I did always enjoy getting to know them by the end, even if I didn't necessarily see their overall narrative purpose to the story. I gave this one a high 3, which was actually unfortunate for me because it had such a strong and engaging start that I thought I was going to give it 5 stars, but it just dragged for a little too long and I couldn't maintain momentum all the way through. After that, I read Force of Nature by Jane Harper, Aaron Falk, Book 2. This one is a contemporary investigatory crime novel following Aaron Falk about a woman who goes missing in an Australian forest during a work retreat. Frankly, I really don't have much to say here. It was an extremely run-of-the-mill book, and I enjoyed it. In fact, I gave it a low 3, but I really don't have much else to say. It was very solidly written, and I don't think anything truly stands out either negatively or positively. It's a book that I read, and I'll probably read the third one as well, but honestly won't think about it much more past that. Following that, I finished Hollow of Fear by Sherry Thomas. This is book 3 in the Lady Sherlock series. This is a historical mystery series that spins what if Sherlock Holmes was a woman. I can't really tell you too much outside of that because this is the third book in the series, and it's actually probably the book that is contingent the most on the previous books, so anything I tell you would probably be considered a spoiler. I thought this one was very fun. As I said earlier, the crime does focus a lot closer to home with this one by threatening someone close to our main character, giving a much stronger stakes than ever before. Because of that, I really got significantly more invested than I necessarily would have been otherwise, to the point where it actually brought this up to 4 stars, which is pretty rare. I typically don't give mystery novels, though I like reading them, very high ratings. There was one part at the end regarding the resolution that was a little too outlandish in my opinion. Like the big reveal at the end, I'm not going to spoil it, but it was a bit of a lame cliche given the rest of the book, I thought. Overall, though, it was really easy to overlook. I really enjoy these characters, so no biggie for me. My main worry, actually, for the series is not about this book in particular, but more how Thomas is going to continue this series. A lot of the times when we're following a mystery that hits very, very close to the characters and therefore the readers, the next mystery that's not focused on them feels very lackluster because I don't care as much. The stakes aren't nearly as high. So it's always a question of, can the author keep up the momentum when the threat isn't as close to the reader's heart? I mean, I'm not a writer, so I really feel like I shouldn't be critiquing this, but whatever, we'll see how it goes. We'll see. I'll keep reading, so I'll let you know. And the last book that I read in February was The Big Four, book 5 in the Hercule Poirot series by Agatha Christie. Man, apparently I just could not stay away from the mystery novels at the end of the month. I do not know why, because I was reading a lot of them throughout the month, so I don't know why all of a sudden they all finished at the same time. This historical mystery pits our beloved Belgian detective against 4 masterminds bent on world domination. This one was freaking wild. It is definitely the worst Christie novel that I have read thus far. Like, by a long shot. It's not even a competition. Some of them were like, okay, but this was bad. This one was just bad. It's like if you made a James Bond movie, but substituted James for Poirot, without changing anything about Poirot. It's literally just Poirot in a James Bond movie. It doesn't fit. Plus, Poirot ends up having a lot of really weird, out-of-character moments just to move the plot along, and it was just bizarre. And not in a good way. It was a bad way. It was quite a bad way. I actually looked it up after the fact and found out that Christie herself hated this one. It was rumored to actually be a bunch of short stories shoehorned together to meet a deadline, which definitely could explain why it's so bad. On top of that disaster of a plot, it's also one of the more racist Poirot books I've read. I always go into Christie novels expecting some sort of racism in it, but holy crap, this one is just constant, unceasing racism. This book is unquestionably a 2-star for me. I do tend to read these books specifically when I have trips that require an airplane to get anywhere. I like to read them on airplanes. I feel it's a really nice environment for me to read them because I can just focus on them and read them all the way through. So I do have another trip coming up at the end of March. Hopefully I'll get some redemption with the next one, which I think is The Mystery of the Blue Train, but we shall see. And that's everything that I finished in February. So overall, not too bad. The books that I'm currently reading are The Jacid Heir by Sarah Hashem, The Lady Traveler's Guide to Scoundrels and Other Gentlemen by Victoria Alexander, and Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. For stats, I read less than last month, but not by a lot. I read 13 books and DNF'd 1. My owned versus library is still not great. I only read 2 of my own books and 11 library books. I did get a really nice even spread across all the genres I like to read, so I was happy about that. And for ratings, it was honestly overall a pretty high month, so that was pretty exciting. I think my average rating was 3.6, so not too shabby, not bad at all. I don't have a whole lot of crafting updates for this month. I really only worked on one project. That's a lie. I also did some sewing, but I sewed my first ever pair of jeans, and because they were my first ever pair, they are not fit for the light of day. So I'm not going to be showing those to anybody. No one will ever see those, including myself, hopefully. We'll never see those again. I'm not going to be showing those. The other project that I did finish was the Christmas Town cross stitch that I had been working on. So here that is. But yeah, it's completed. You can see that I did not even iron it before taking this photo. So you see my beautiful little embroidery hoop marking in the bottom. Nailed that one. So yeah, good job, Jay. Good job. Proud of you for that one. Otherwise, that is everything for this month. So thank you very much for watching all the way through, and I hope you have a wonderful next month. See you then. Bye.